We continue now at the top of Daf Mem Beis Amud Aleph in Meseches Bava Basra. This is Bava Basra Daf 42a. On the previous Amud, Rav said that if you have shlosh lekuchos, let's say you have three buyers, so they're mitzdarfin zeh im zeh, they can join together to create a chazaka. But Rav said that's only true if the buyers were using a shtar, because then there's a kol, the word goes out that one sold to the other, and therefore again they can be mitzdarf, they can join together to create the 3-year chazaka. Let's say each buyer was just there for 1 year, and again that's only true with a shtar. And so the Gemara asked, does that mean to say there's only a kol when you buy with a shtar, but not when you buy without a shtar? But that seems to contradict something else that Rav said, because Rav said that if you have a buyer who buys a piece of property with edim, meaning without a shtar, so then if there was achrayus, if the seller took responsibility for that sale, and then the property is taken away from the buyer can collect from the seller, and even from the chasim mishubadim, even from property that had a lien on it. Let's say the seller subsequently sold other property to other buyers, and he's allowed to do that apparently because there is a kol, because the word goes out that he bought biachrayis, and so you see even without a shtar we see that there's a kol. And the Gemara says it's different over there by a sale because inu, or rather it's different over there by subsequent buyers, because inu afsidu an afshayu, because it's considered that they're making themselves lose. When you buy property, you have to inquire, you have to make sure that there's no lien against the seller. That's a responsibility of the buyer. And the Rashbam explains, "Inu afsidu anafshayu deshadu zuzayu bechti." It's like they're throwing away their money. Shahayalem lach gor yafe im machar shum karka b'achrayis. V'lo also they need to find out if this person they're buying from sold land b'achrayis. They didn't do that. Lafika chifsidu. That's why they lose out. Aval gabe shalosh lekuchos. But when you're talking about three buyers who are joining together to make a chazaka, ein lahafsid hama'ar. That's not a reason to say that the person protesting should lose out. The kaven deleka shtar b'mechiras halal. Because if there was no document in these sales, v'lo yotza hakol memela, and the kol didn't go out automatically, lo hayalo lachgor, we're not going to say that the person protesting had to investigate. The meimar amar, because he's going to say to himself, lefisha yirem lahachzik bekarka shali lo achlu kalecha shalosh shanim, because of the fact that they were afraid to make a chazak on my land. That's why none of them were there for 3 years, and so it's a different situation when you're talking about a ma'arer. And the Gemara continues, umiyama Rav hachi, but did Rav really say this, that when you're talking about a person who buys a piece of property b'achrayus, even if it's without a shtar, that he's allowed to collect from the chasim mishubadim? But we learned in the Mishnah, this is brought later on, hamalves chavero b'shtar. This is talking about somebody who lends money. It's not talking about a purchase, but a loan. If somebody lends money to his friend with a shtar, so then govim in the chasim mishubadim. Then the malv is allowed to collect even from the chasim mishubadim, even if there's a lien. But al yedei edim. But if the loan is only made through edim, govim in the chasim and echor, he can only collect from the free property. He is not allowed to collect from the property. Let's say that the borrower subsequently sells. That's not considered to be that he can collect from property with a lien on it. And so here you see the exact opposite. Here you see that without a shtar, the kol doesn't go out, and therefore you're not allowed to collect from the chasim mishubadim. Now, if you're going to say Rav Tanahu Polig, maybe you'll say that Rav is a Tana, is considered to be a Tana, and he can argue with the Mishnah. This proof we're bringing is from a Mishnah. It's not necessarily a contradiction to Rav. But it's not true, because Rav and Shmuel both say milva alpeh eino gov. If you have a loan, rather, alpeh, meaning there is no shtar, it's just an oral loan, you can't collect. Eino gov v'lo min hayarshim v'lo min halakuchos. You can't collect from heirs, and you can't collect from buyers. Again, you can't collect from the chasim mishubadim. It seems that Rav agrees with that Mishnah. And so the Gemara answers, milva azvini karamis. Are you trying to ask a question from the case of a loan to the case of a purchase? Because again, the case in the previous Amud, which Rav was talking about a buyer who buys a piece of property b'achrayis that is allowed to collect from the chasim mishubadim. That is not comparable at all to a milva. Milva ki kayazif b'tzina kayazif. In general, when people borrow money, they do it privately because they don't want people to be aware of the fact that they need money, because then everything they're selling, people are going to be aware that they really need money. The things that they then try to sell, the price is going to go down. So loans are specifically done in private, because we don't want, again, the person doesn't want his property to be undervalued. But Zavini, but when it comes to a sale, man dezavin, if somebody's trying to sell property, man dezavin ara, somebody's trying to sell land, befar hesya, he tries to do it as publicly as possible to get as many buyers as possible, because he wants the word to go out, and so therefore you can't really ask a question from a case of a sale from a case of a loan, rather, to a case of a sale. And the Gemara continues, Tanu Rabban, and the rabbis taught, Achlo ha'av shana v'haben shtayim. Let's say the father was there for a year, we're talking about making a chazaka, and a son was then on the property for 2 years. Ha'av shtayim v'haben shana, or the reverse, the father was on the property for 2 years, years, and the son for 1 year. Ha'av shana v'haben shana v'halokech shana, or let's say you have a father for a year, a son for a year, and then a buyer for a year. So here we have a situation of a buyer. Harezu chazaka, that is a good chazaka. And so the Gemara says, L'meimra de lokeach islay kola. Does that mean to say that the buyer, there is a kohl? And we can assume over here, Tosas mentions it, we can assume over here we're talking with a shtar. And so again, with a shtar, there's a kohl, and the buyer is able to be mitzdaref together with the father and the son to create the chazaka, like we said in the previous Amud, by 3 buyers. But we have a contradiction. Uramini, we have the following contradiction. Achla b'fnei ha'avshana. Let's say it's somebody else that's on the property, and the father is the one that would be making the protest. He's the previous owner. So let's say the father's around for 1 year, ubifnei haben shtayim, and then you're consuming from the property in front of the son for 2 years, so you're making a 3-year chazaka, but first it was the father that would be protesting, then the father died, and it would be the son that would be protesting, or the reverse, bifnei ha'av shtayim, ubifnei haben shana, let's say it's in front of the father for 2 years, in front of the son for 1 year, bifnei ha'av shana, ubifnei haben shana, ubifnei lokeach shana, or let's say it's in front of the father for 1 year, in front of the son for 1 year, and then in front of the buyer for 1 year. Now the idea over here is that the son actually sold the property. That shows the son definitely thinks it's his property, and so now you're sitting on there for another year in front of the buyer. In all of these cases, harezu chazak, in all of these cases, it's a good chazaka. And so the Gemara asks, V'salka daitach lokech islay kola. Now, if it's true that when there's a buyer, the word goes out and there's a kol, so that very act of selling it to the buyer, ein loch macha gedola mizu, there should be no greater protest than that. That is a protest. So how is this person making a chazaka when the previous owner made a sale? Clearly, that should be counted as a protest if there's a kol that goes out from the sale. And the Gemara answers, Amar Papa says, Kitanyo ahi, that brisa, when it says over there that in a situation where he sells the property, the son sells the property to a buyer, it's not considered a macha, that's talking about a specific scenario, b'mocher sados of stam. He just sells his field in general. He doesn't sell that particular field, and therefore he wasn't specific. He's just saying, I'm going to sell you a field. That is not considered to be macha. That's not considered to be a protest. And the Rashbam explains, Amar of Papa says, Liolamei malach, really I'll say to you, the lokeach islay kola, that when a person buys the field, there is a kol, the word does go out. V'hachen over here, amaylo chashvi macha, lekichas halokeach min haben, why is it not considered a protest when the lokeach buys it from the son? Mishum democher lo haben kol sados of stam, because the case is that the son sold him all of his fields, meaning osan shayu shalav, meaning the son in general sold all fields that belong to my father. V'toin halokeach, and the buyer is just claiming this field was included among those fields, but that wouldn't be considered a protest. Because we say back to him, he sold all the fields except this one wasn't included in the sale. Now, if this specific field was sold on its own, so then already then it's true. The chazak of the machzik would be nullified. There'd be no greater protest than this. And the Gemara continues with the Mishnah, Shutfin v'harisin v'apetropin ein lahem chazaku. Umnen are craftsmen, shutfin are partners, harisin are sharecroppers, and apetropin are caretakers of property. None of them can establish a chazaka over property that they have in their possession. The idea over here is that these are people that in general they might take the property for other reasons. A craftsman might take some property to work on it. A shutf already has access to the property. He's a partner. In ours is a sharecropper. He's going to work the land and get a certain percentage. Apetropis, the same idea. He's a caretaker of the land. The fact that they're on the land for 3 years, or the fact that they have possession of the particular items, doesn't create a chazaka. And the Mishnah continues along the same lines, Lola ish chazaka b'nichsei ishto, a man cannot make a chazaka in the property of his wife. Let's say she brings nichsei melug into the marriage. V'lola isha chazaka b'nichsei bal, and a wife is not able to make a chazaka in the property of her husband. Again, she also has regular access to his property. V'lola av b'nichsei haben, v'lola ben b'nichsei av, a father can't make a chazaka in his son's property, and a son cannot make a chazaka in his father's property for the same reason. And the Mishnah says, B'amed devarim amurim, what are we talking about in this perek so far? We're talking about chazaka. We're talking b'machzik. We're talking about the chazaka of a machzik. What that means to say is somebody who's going to be on land and is having a dispute with the previous owner. So then we say, you need to have a chazaka for this certain amount of time, for 3 years, in order to establish a chazaka. The Mishnah here is making a distinction between the chazaka of 3 years and the chazaka that we refer to as a kinyan that you make on an object. Aval b'nosein matana. But for example, let's say you're giving a gift, where brothers are dividing property. Let's say the property of a ger, the ger dies, he doesn't have anyone who's going to inherit him, and it becomes hefker, so you're making a kinyan chazaka. So there you just make a kinyan, and it's an immediate, you make a kinyan chazaka, and it's an immediate kind of kinyan. Noal, the gadar, uparatz kolshu, if the person closes or fences or opens up the fence, any amount, essentially any kind of working, so to speak, of the property, harezu chazaka, that's considered to be a chazaka, and it creates a kinyan on the property, and we will continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Mem Beis Amud Beis.